Good morning. We are on Daf Chaf Daled Amud Aleph 24a. Today's Daf is going to deal with the Trumas Hadeshen, which we were talking about. What part of the avodah was done by the Kohen, and the begadim, the clothing you had to wear. So now Rabban is going to ask how much of the Trumas Hadeshen needs to be taken. Now, the word teruma always means an uplifting, taking a portion and raising it up, elevating it from that to sanctify, to be mekadesh certain part. That's usually the word teruma. So, by Rabbi Avin asked, Terumas Hadeshen bekama. How much is needed for the Terumas Hadeshen? So the Kohen goes up onto the ramp, he goes into the on the mizbeach, he goes to the ma'aracha, to the fire that was there, that they put they would burn the murim, the parts that would go on the mizbeach, and he would take a shovel's worth and put it off to the side. That's what we saw. But how much does he have to take out from the ash from yesterday's avodah? And as we talked about before, the majority of the cleanup would go into the tapuach, that mound of ash and debris in the center of the mizbeach. However, certain small amount would go on the side of the kevesh, or the side of the ramp, in the spot called the spot for the ash, and as we saw, some other parts would also go there. So Rabbi Avin, Trumas Hadeshen bekama. How much must he take from the ash? Mitrumas Meiser Yalfinala. Would you say you would learn it from Trumas Meiser? Trumas Meiser is the Levi's tithe of the tithe that he gets. In all produce, the way we do it is that we would have a teruma taken. That's general teruma, which is unspecified, but let's say approximately 2%. The Gemara gives variations for that, and then 10% of that remaining 98%, so 9.8, would go to the Levi. The Levi would then be obligated to take 10% from that which he had already taken. He would take from what he received, from the 9.8%, which was the tithe, that Meiser, Levi, that the Levi got, the Meiser Rishon, that of that 9.8% of the total crop of this owner, that the Levi got 9.8%, he would then give 10% of that, which would, from the total amount, be just under 1%. So really, excluding the teruma, from the remainder, the Kohen gets 10%, the Levi gets 10%, and of that he gives 10%, which is 1% of the original total of the crop. So over here, the Gemara says, let's learn it from the first idea is let's learn from Trumas Meiser, and Trumas Meiser has either 10%, which a Levi takes, or 1% from the total amount from the original crop, or really it's 0.98%. Either way, should we learn it from there? And there it says v'hari moise mimenu, a similar term that it says over here, v'heri mimenu. You will lift from it, v'hari moise, and you shall lift from it, you plural. In any case, so should we learn from Terumas Meiser, Mitrumas Midyan, or should we learn from Trumas Midyan, where when they went to battle in Midian and then they came back, one of 500 was given as a teruma, so 0.2%. So the question is, should we do really one version in Rashi is 10%? Should we give 1%? Or should we give really 1 of 500, 0.2%? How much of this ash has to be taken? So actually, the Gemara says it's not a percentage, and we're not learning it from the trumas that require a percentage, but we're learning it from a similar term itself. Tashema, the Tana Rabbi Chia, Nemar Kan Vaherim. Rabbi Chia said that it says over here Vaherim, and and he will have uplifted. And it says it says the same by a mincha, by the kemitza. He will uplift from it a full kometz worth. So by the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash itself, we have another time where it uses the specific word veherim, which means to do teruma, but to uplift, to have uplifted. And just as over there by the mincha, it's talking about a kometz worth. So to in the shovel, you have to have minimally a kometz worth. Veherim mal halam, so just as over there, it's a kometz worth. Avkam bekumtzoi. So too over here, it's a kometz worth. And so the amount that has to get on the shovel is minimally the amount that a kohen would get in his hand as a kometz. So obviously, it doesn't. Rashi points out it doesn't mean he's actually going to do a kometz, because we're talking about coals. We're talking about the smoldering wood from the pyre, and so for sure it doesn't mean actually a kamitza. But what we can learn from there is the amount, because he's going to do it with a shovel, but the amount is what we're learning. Now we had said that this is a avodah for the kohen. In the avodah for kohen, if a non-kohen would do the avodah, there are two levels. There's a level where it's invalid because they're non-kohen. Well, actually, three levels. Some avodah is kosher by Ezar. A non-kohen is allowed to do it. For instance, we've seen shchita. Shchita, even though that's a part of the avodah, and generally a kohen would do it, and the intent of the avodah would invalidate or validate it. Nevertheless, it would be defined as it would be okay if a non-kohen does it. There are most of the avodah Beis Hamikdash only a kohen can do. There are some that would be not only invalidated if a non-kohen does it, but also the zar, the non-kohen who does the avodah, is chayiv misa, gets the death penalty from Shamayim. So the Gemara now is going to go into which part is Trumas Hadesh. Really, this is brought to see is Trumas Hadesh included in that. Amar Rav. So Rav said, Arba avodas zar chayolim misa. There are four avodas that, even though that a zar is not allowed to do any of them, only four of them is there misa for it. Which are the four? Zrika, the spritzing of the blood on the mizbeach, haktara, vaktara, and the burning up of whatever parts go on the mizbeach, whether it's on the outer mizbeach and its parts, or the inner mizbeach and its incense, or whatever parts go on the fire to burn up. Haktara literally means smokifying, turning something into smoke. So the haktara, v'nisach hamayim, and the pouring of the water on the mizbeach, which is done on Sukkot. V'nisach hayayin, and the pouring of the wine on the mizbeach, which goes with various karbanas, v'yayin lanesach, and wine to pour. So there are various karbanas. Minchas would have wine. So these four karbanas are included in misa. The Levi adds af trumas hadeshin. Also, trumas hadeshin would also be included, where if a zar does the avodah of trumas hadeshin, removing that, is going to be chayv misa. It's going to be a capital punishment, even though it's not meted out by Beis Din, it's by Shamayim. It's capital punishment. V'chein tani Levi mastita. Levi taught in a brisa this way. Af trumas hadeshin. Also trumas hadeshin. So now, my time in the Rav. So what is the reasoning of Rav, and what's the reasoning of Levi? So Rav is going to say, based on the pasuk that tells us that only the kahanim can do the avodah, and a zar cannot do the avodah, and if they do, they get misa. There it says like this: Va'ata, and you, vanecha, and your children itach, with you. Tishmeru es kahunaschem, you shall guard your kahuna. L'chol dvar mizbeach, to all matters of the mizbeach. And to that which is on the inner side of the curtain, meaning in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. va'avadtem avodas matana. Eten es kunaschem bazar karvimas. The small Gemara on the table. So the avoda that's mentioned. So it mentions specific works. So first it says generally you should guard your kahuna, and then it says to all matters of the mizbeach and to all matters that go inside the kodesh hakadashim, and you shall do the avoda. But it says it differently. It doesn't say. It's superfluous to say va'avadtem avodas matana. It already said. So why does it say va'avadtem? Avadtem is to hint that it needs to be avodas tama. So avodah tama, the Gemara is going to say it rash now means tama means completion and means wholeness. So va'avadtem, and you will have the avodah of avodah tama. That means the avodah that ends the avodah, as opposed to the avodah that is in the midst of. It has to be the whole or the completion of the avodah. Yeah. So that's va'avadtam, and avodas matano is going to say a drasha. It says the Torah is calling it an avodah of a gift. Now that's odd. What does it mean? Avodah is a gift. All avodah, whatever avodah is. So matan over here, the Gemara says what it means is placement. Gift is a matan, that which you're giving, and matana is that which is put on. And the drash that Rav is going to make is avodas matana excludes that which the service of taking off. So it needs to be the completion of the whole of the avodah, and it needs to be placement. So etenes kunaschem azar karvimas. Avodas matana, malo avodas siluk. That's the reason of Rav. Rav says it has to be an avodah that's being placed on the mizbeach. That's the service being done, and not the avodah of taking off of the mizbeach. That's the avodah being done. Va'avadtam, and this that it says that it shall be and you shall serve, but avodah tama, a complete service, and that excludes any part of the avodah that has another step beyond it. So if there's another step that would not be included. So that's the opinion of Rav. Rav explains this pasuk to mean it needs to be avodah tama, the end of the avodah, the completion of the avodah, and that's where there's a zara karev yumos, that the zara that comes close, it's a capital punishment by Shamayim. And and avodas matana says that it has to be placement as opposed to be removing. Yeah. So the Gemara says, Levi, and Levi's opinion is Rabbi Rachman chol dvar mizbeach. He says no, that even taking off the ash, that Trumas Adeshin is going to be included in this in the Zara Karev Yumas, in the punishment of Misa B'dei Shamayim, because it's a part of the Mizbeach. And the beginning of this pasuk says that you will guard your kahuna l'chol devar mizbeach, to all manners of the mizbeachs. It says, okay, other avodah around the Beis Hamikdash, you can say it has to be the end, the completion of the avodah, etc. But on the mizbeach, the pasuk clearly says l'chol devar mizbeach, and everything on the mizbeach, and therefore even the removal part of the mizbeach should also be included. Rav says, that's coming for something else. It's coming for the 7 spritzes that are done on the inside mizbeach when there's a bull brought for an atonement for the community, whether it's when Parahel Davar or Mashiach, where the Beis Din or the Kohen Gadol mistaken in a ruling, and on the basis of that, led the community astray or the Kahanim astray, and then there's a bull that's brought as an atonement, as a kapara, and that bull gets spritzed on the inner mizbeach, the blood, as well as by Yom Kippur, on Yom Kippur, which is also a kapara, the power of the Kohen Gadol, that also gets spritzed on the mizbeach, on the golden mizbeach on the inside, and also by the Matzorah, by the Matzorah also from the oil gets spritzed in the Heichal. Yeah, and so therefore it says that the fact that it says L'chol Dvar HaMizbeach, it includes everything on the Mizbeach, even the spritzing on the Mizbeach. But it doesn't include, but it has to be avodas matana. It has to be placing on and not removing, and that l'chol dvar mizbeach includes those. But Levi nafkale midover. Levi says, well, we can learn all of that because it says l'chol dvar hamizbeach, right? It could have just said. Dvar HaMizbeach or L'chol HaMizbeach. What the word is extra, and so therefore we can include Trumas Hadeshin and Dvar HaMizbeach. So L'chol is going to add the spritzes of the inner base Mizbeach, and Dvar is adding the removal of things from the Mizbeach like Trumas Hadeshin. And Mizbeach tells you the manners of Mizbeach. So that's the way Levi responds. The whole Davar, it says he's having a separate drash from Davar and Mikol Davar. The Rav, Davar Mikol Davar Le Darash. And Rav says, no, he's not going to say a drash on splitting up the phrase Kol and Davar and Mizbeach. So he's going to learn Kol Dvar Mizbeach includes not only that which is placed on the mizbeach, but also typically as avodah, but also that which is spritzed on the mizbeach, the on top of mizbeach, the inner, what's inside the kodesh, and that's included. But trumas hadeshin removal from the mizbeach is not included in the misa. So now the Gemara says, okay, great. So we now know the basis for Rav and the basis for Levi, but the pasuk itself should exclude some of this, because we know as a rule you have a klal, a generalization, and then a prat and a specification. Then we say as a rule that the specification is the only thing included in the generalization. So over here you have klal avodas matana, anything placed on the mizbeach, prat. Sorry, it says l'chol dvar mizbeach, anything on the mizbeach, and then it says kol avodas matana, everything that's placed on the mizbeach, prat. So then you have a klal of prat. You have a generalization, all that matters of mizbeach, and then it says a specification, anything placed on the mizbeach. And then the rule is that only that which was specified is included in the generalization. And so when it said a generalization, it said a klal of l'chol mizbeach, to all matters of the mizbeach, which you would think includes other things as well, whether removal or spritzing on. But then it says only that which is avodas matana, that which is placed on the mizbeach, and then I would say only avodas matana only including that which is placed on mizbeach, avodas silukulite, but it would not include that which is removal of the mizbeach, and therefore trumas hadeshin should be excluded. And this is a question on Levi, that even if you're going to say that you have a drasha, but we have a general rule, klal prat. Now the Gemara says, Amakra, ulimi beis la pareches. It doesn't only say to the mizbeach, l'chol dvar mizbeach. It also says ulumi beis la pareches, that anything that goes inside the mizbeach, inside the kaparas, the kodesh hakadashim, and that will serve as a break, as a hefsek, a pause in the pasuk, or a detour in the pasuk between the generalization and the specification, because it says to all the manners of the mizbeach, to all the manners that go inside the kodesh hakadashim, and then it says, and you will do the avodas tama and the avodah of matana. So therefore, it's not directly related that the avodas matana is specifically on the mizbeach, and therefore we're going to say that avodah matana is referring to the mizbeach, to the what goes inside the kodesh hakadashim, and not the what goes on the mizbeach. And therefore, the avodah tama means that on the inside of the kodesh hakadashim, and the avodah matana as well, that the exclusion of removal is only going to be in regards to going inside the kodesh hakadashim. But in the avodah outside of the kodesh hakadashim, afilu avodah siluk, even removal is going to be included in this pasuk. So we have just the outline of the pasuk again, or the structure of the pasuk again. We have, it says, anything in the mizbeach, anything that goes inside the kodesh hakadashim beyond the curtains, you will do avodah tama and avodas matana, the completion of the avodah and avodah of placement, and any non-kohen that does it, it's capital punishment. Now, that correlation, or that connection of the generalization and specification, the generalization is anything going in the kodesh hakadashim beyond the curtain, and there it says it has to be avodas matana, placement, and not removal. But you can't put it back to the previous generalization beforehand, because that was the first generalization on the mizbeach, inside the kodesh hakadashim, and then that which you place and not what you remove, and so it doesn't go back to the first generalization; it goes to the second generalization. So the Gemara says, so then also the first specification, which is that avad tem, it has to be avodah tama, only that which is a completion of avodah, but would also only apply to the inside of the kodesh hakadashim. But indeed, outside of the kodesh hakadashim, in the regular avodah, which is almost all of the avodah, even if it is not the completion of avodah, should be included, and therefore it wouldn't just be the zrika, the spritzing, but also the steps beforehand, because as we said, the list of 4 that Rav had included spritzing, and it has to be because it's completion of the avodah. So the shechting is not included, and the receiving of the blood is not included, and bringing it to the mizbeach is not included. The last of that avodah is the spritzing of the blood, and only that's included. But if you're telling me that the specification, the miyut or the prat, the specification where it says that it has to be a avodah that completes the service, is only referring, if the avodah that's placement only refers to inside the curtain in the kodesh hakadashim, well, that should be true also for the specification for the prat, that it goes into, it has to be the completion of the avodah. And then we would say that only a completion of avodah inside of the kodesh hakadashim is azar, will azar get misa for. But outside, azar will get misa, non-kohen will get misa, the death penalty, even if it's done outside, even if it's not the end of the avodah. And therefore it'll be outside, even a part of the service that has another step after it. So Gemara says no, ve'avadtam, and you will do the avodah. Hadar arvei kra. Ve'avadtam tells you that the pasuk put it together that in regards to avodah tama, or in regards to the avodah, that it has to be an avodah of completion, the vav connects it, right? It's an and, the vav and prefix, and so when it says ve'avad tam, it means and also the avodah must be complete, to tell you that both the inside the mizbeach and not inside the kodesh HaKodashim and not inside on the mizbeach as well, any part has to be the completion. However, the avodas matana, where it doesn't say and avodas matana, it just says avodas matana, the placement, the avodah, that is referring only to inside the kodesh HaKodashim. So to conclude, we have two versions of how to learn this pasuk. Rav learns that it applies to avodas tama and avodas matana. It has to be the completion of the avodah, as well as the avodah of removal and avodah of placement, and therefore the avodah of removal of Trumas Hadashim is not included. But it does have to be, regardless of where it is, it's going to have to be that it is a avodah tama, the completion avodah. Whereas Levi says that no, the avodah matana, the placement part, only applies to the Kodesh HaKodashim, inside the Holy of Holies, because that's where you have the generalization specification. Whereas the avodah tama, that has to be the completion of that set of avodah, and that applies both to in and out because of the extra vav, and so it's limited to the zar akar of yumas. This, that there is a death penalty from Shamayim, not in Beis Din, but there is a death penalty for someone who does avodah, a non-kohen who does the avodah. These steps of the avodah will be included. According to Levi, all avodas, matana, as well avodah that is placement, as well as the avodah of removal will work if it's outside. Inside the Kodesh HaKodashim, avodah of removal would not apply, and it has to be that it is the completion of the avodah, regardless if it's inside or outside. So, by Rabba, and now Rabba asks a question: Avodah silik behechel mount. What about? So we talked about outside on the mizbeach in the courtyard, and we talked about inside, beyond the curtain of the Kodesh HaKodashim. What about in the hechel itself, in the Kodesh, in the Beis Hamikdash? The structure, the menorah is there, the shulchan is there, where the showbread is on the table. You have the mizbeach, which we talked about, the golden mizbeach that has some spritzing. What about over there? Avodah siluk, the removal avodah, which according to Levi, we said in the Kodesh, removal avodah is excluded, and outside on the great mizbeach, the larger mizbeach. There, we said that avodah of removal, such as the Trumas Hadashim, is included in this severity for a non-kohen doing the avodah. What about in between? What about removal of the menorah to clean it out, or the removal of the ash from the mizbeach on the inner mizbeach? Lifnim edaminale. Do we say, oh, well, that's inside, and therefore it's like the Kodesh HaKodashim, it's like the Holy of Holies, and therefore it would be excluded? Or do we say, no, it's like the outer Mizbech, and just like by the outer Mizbech, even a removal avodah would count as Zara Karav Yumas, as the severe punishment for someone who, a non-Kohen who does avodah, so too for removal avodah in the inner Mizbech. And then Rav himself responded, and he said, I can show from the pasuk itself. If it had said mi beis la paroches, if it had said from the inside of the paroches beyond the curtain, so then I would say, you know what that means? Only that which is inside the curtain. However, it says all the avodah of the mizbeach and what's inside the curtain. Vilimi beis la paroches. The and the inside is to tell you also the heichal itself is going to be exempt. That if a non-kohen does the avodah of removal from the Kodesh HaKodashim, or even from just the Kodesh from the mizbeach, from the Beis Hamikdash itself, not the courtyard, it's going to be excluded, and he will not get the death penalty. Well, if that's the case, so you're saying only removal is now. Well, what about if he does a placement? So a non-kohen who places on the table, places the showbread, the lechem apanim on the table, should be included, because you're telling me the only exclusion is in the Beis Hamikdash. A removal avodah is excluded. Well, then a placement avodah in the Beis Hamikdash is going to be included, and the zar should be chayiv misa for putting the lechem apanim, the showbread, on the table. And that's not true, because Rav had a list of 4 and Levi only added 1, and it didn't include the placement of the mizbeach of the breads on the table. So the Gemara says no, it's not avodah tama. It's not the completion of the avodah, because yes, you put the showbreads on, you put the 12 lechem apanim on, but there's another step. Ikasida bazichin. After that, they would put the 2 bowls of frankincense of levina on the table between the 2 piles of 6, the 2 racks of 6 breads on each side. In between, you're going to have these 2, the placement of the levina. Well, then, okay, so then the placement of the levina is the completion of the avodah, and therefore he should be chayiv for placing the levina, and that should have been in the list. Well, there's the removal of the bread. Every Shabbos they would also have the avodah of removing of the bread and taking the levina to the mizbeach, ba'aktara, and putting it on the mizbeach. And so that part, indeed, placement on the mizbeach is going to be included. Zar shasidas a menorah lichayv. A zar, a non-kohen, who fixes up the menorah to make it ready. So he's masader, organizes or cleans out the menorah. No, that's not completion, because he still has to put in a wick for the next avodah. Nasam psila l'chayv. Okay, so then placing the wick should be chayiv. You want to say, no, that's not the completion. Ikenasin shemen. You still have to place the oil. Great. So nasam shemen l'chayv. The placement of the oil should be chayiv. Ikahadlaka. No, there's the lighting of the menorah, and the lighting of the menorah is going to be the completion of the avodah. Okay, so hidlik l'chayiv. So put into the list that a non-kohen who lights the menorah should be chayiv misa for hadlaka. The Gemara says no, hadlaka lav avodah. The hadlaka itself does not count as an avodah. Now this is there's a lot of difficulty in understanding why this will not count as avodah, especially in light of the next Gemara, which is going to try and compare it and say that the ignition of fire on the mizbeach would be avodah. So there are multiple ways of understanding this. One is that since it's an oil-soaked wick, as soon as the fire touches it, it will ignite, and so that's not avodah. It's Rashi says something like shal heves me'alel. It goes up on its own, and therefore it doesn't really require and count as avodah, because there's nothing to it. You just take fire to it, and it ignites on its own immediately. The other is that the fire doesn't have less beimamish. It doesn't have any physical substance. It's a gas, right? It's just a fire, and so that doesn't count as avodah. And for both, we're going to have to see the next Gemara and try and understand the distinction. The Gemara says, really, hadlaka is not a avodah, and one of these 2 explanations are others as well. V'loi, Vatani, we learned the Torah explicitly says at the beginning of Vayikra that the children of Aaron have to place a fire on the mizbeach. That is a part of the obligations. And they have to put wood onto that fire. Which teaches us that the match, they didn't have a necessary match with sulfur and so on, but they were the match, which was basically a splinter, and a larger splinter that we'd use as to ignite the fire, to light the wood, that alisa has to be done by a kosher kayin, ubekli sharis, and in the service vessels, meaning he has to be dressed in his clothing of a kayin, which whether the 4 clothing of a minor kayin or the 8 of a kayin gadol, and and you see that it's considered an avodah. And how can you tell me igniting the menorah doesn't count as an avodah? Over here, you see the igniting the pyre is an avodah. It has to be kosher in all ways. And what it says, indeed, that does count as an avodah, because that's much more difficult. It doesn't light right away, as well as the Gemara told us earlier that one of the miracles of the fire on the Mizbeach was that it had mamash, that it had some substance to it, whatever that means. So that was distinct from the menorah. Hadlaka lav avedi, and Gemara says, okay, so the lighting of the menorah is not aveda. Elamiyata zorsha sidas amaracha lichayim. Okay, so what you're saying now, that the menorah doesn't count as a lighting, but the pyre on the mizbeach does count as an avodah. Well, then the non-kohen who would do who set up the pyre on the mizbeach should also be chayiv, and that's not listed in Kasidah Shnei Gezirei Eitzim. No, there's still the two Gezirei Eitzim, which is the two bricks of or blocks of wood that would be placed on the pyre that were part of the avodah, was part of a specific mitzvah, and that would be put on. And we saw about that in Shkolim, and so that avodah has to be done by that avodah has to be done. So it's the next step. So the building of the pyre is not the completion. Well, then, so let's list also somebody, the non-kohen, to put these two woods on. Well, says no, that doesn't count. Because on top of the pyre, the whole purpose of the pyre is so that the parts of the animal that go on the mizbeach go on that fire. So putting the wood on is not the completion of that avodah; it's actually putting the parts on the mizbeach, and that indeed would be included. Amar Ravasi, Amar Rav Yochanan. What about the statement of Rabbi Yochanan that Ravasi said in his name, that indeed that a non-kohen who put the two pieces of wood on is going to be chayiv, and that would mean that he held that was the completion of the avodah. So this is the basis of that machlokes. The machlokes says, does this count as the completion of the avodah? In other words, do we say that the making of the pyre, the setting up of the wood on the mizbeach, is an independent avodah? That's the building of the fire. The next part of the putting the animal parts on the fire is a part of the korban. That's not the korban eitzim. That's not the wood korban. That's a separate part. That's what Rabbi Yochanan says. He says, so building the pyre is not the end. Putting the shnei gezrei eitzim on top of that, the two blocks of wood on top, that would count as the completion of this part of the avodah, of the building of the pyre and making the eish on the mizbeach. And therefore, indeed, that would be chayiv if a non-kohen did it, if a zar did it. Whereas Rav says, no, that is not the completion, because the whole purpose, the whole purpose of the structure is, or really, it's all one structure. The building of the fire and the burning is all one. And so whatever parts go on is the completion. Tanaka Vasida Rav, Tanaka Vasida Levi. Now we have a brisa like Rav that Trumas Hadeshin is not included for a zar, and we have a brisa like Levi that Trumas Hadeshin is included. Tanaka Vasida Rav, like Rav, Avodah Zar Chayv Alein Misa. Here are the avodas that the non-kohen would be chayv misa if he did them. Zrikas dam, the spritzing of the blood, because that's the completion of that part of the avodah of the dam. Zrik bein lefnim, bein lefnai lefnim, whether it's inside the kodesh, whether it's in the kodesh hakadashim in the holy of holies, v'amazeh bechatas ha'oif, and the spritzing of the bird chatas blood. And the squeezing it on the mizbeach, and the one who puts the ola bird on the mizbeach, and the one who pours the 3 lug of water on sukkahs, and the 3 lug of wine. So all of these are going to be included because they are the spritzings on the mizbeach, or the the pouring on the mizbech. So these are the completion of their avodas. Tanakh say the Levi. However, we have a brisa that it says like Levi that includes also the removing of the ash, the Trumas Hadeshin. It says avodah shazar chayv misa hamer misadeshin. One who removes the dust Trumas Hadeshin is also included. And the 7 spritzings on the inside of the kodesh by the mizbeach, v'sheva mitzora, and the oil pouring on the inner mizbeach by the mitzora. Hamala gabi mizbeach, one who brings anything up on the mizbeach. Bein davar kosher, bein davar pasul, regardless of what he brought up was kosher or not. If it's we saw that there's some things that if it went up on the mizbeach, it needs to come down. It's so invalid that even if it's been put up, it's got to be brought down. So that doesn't really count. However, there are certain parts that are not supposed to go on the mizbeach. However, once you brought it up, the mizbeach absorbs it, as it were, and it becomes a part of the service of the mizbeach, and it counts. So those things that once you brought it up, it remains up and you don't bring it down. If a non-kohen brought it up, that counts as doing something on the mizbeach. So we see this is the opinion of Levi, and we have that the what's included is also going to be the Trumas Hadeshin. So we learned that the Trumas Hadeshin, according to Levi, everybody agrees the kohen is not allowed to do. A non-kohen is not allowed to do the avodah. But what's included in this pasuk that says that a kohen a non-kohen who does avodah chayav yumas, that he gets from Shamayim, he'll get the death penalty. Again, it's not from Beis Din, but from heaven will punish him with an early death. Where do we what's included? So it has to be avodah tama, the completion part. It also has to be avodas matana, a placement. However, Levi limits the placement part only in the Holy of Holies, and we said maybe also in the Kodesh itself, in the Beis Hamikdash, but on the mizbeach in the outside, even a removal would count, and that includes the Trumas Hadeshin, which was our question. Tomorrow morning, Be'ez Hashem, we'll talk about the pious and how that was done, the lottery and how and the details of that. Yeshakach, have a great day.